Good morning. We're going to be starting a new unit on light and sound. So that sort of prompts us to ask, well, what do we know about light? And even more basic than that, how do we perceive or sense the world around us, specifically light and then sound, since our unit will be about sound as well. How do we know about it? Well, what do you already know about light? What do you think of when you think of light? You might think of the main source of the Earth's light, which is the sun. Okay, it really is the very basic. Sorry, hold on. Very basic, most important source of light is the sun for the Earth. But there are other sources of light that you know of. Some of them are natural and some are man-made. We've got lasers, electricity. We can walk into a room and flip a switch and have electricity. Flashlights, fire, candles, bioluminescent organisms like fireflies and glowworms and some deep sea creatures, certain plants and bacteria, chemoluminescent or phosphorescent items like glow-in-the-dark stickers or toys. There's a lot of glow-in-the-dark stuff. So why is light so important to us? That's one of the questions we're going to be delving into as we do this unit. Why is it so important to us, and why are we spending a whole unit on light and sound? Well, most importantly, it allows us to see. But light also gives us warmth, allows for photosynthesis and growth of living things, allows us to grow crops and food. Very quickly, if we did not have light hitting the earth, we would not have food. Why do we experience sunlight for only part of the day? Well, the earth rotates on its tilted axis once a day, which causes us to have day and night. Why do some areas on earth receive more sunlight and have warmer seasons at different times of the year? Seasons happen because of the earth's axis being tilted. As Earth orbits the sun, some locations receive more sunlight for longer periods of time than others. Areas near the equator receive the most direct sunlight for the longest periods of time. So they are the warmest year-round. So as we listen to today's read aloud, see if you can answer the question, what is light? Good morning, my friend, said a smiling Mr. Samuel Van Lumen. It's good to see you. I see you are already working, replied Jack O'Deray, as he pushed open the creaky garden gate. Hold on. What are you painting today? Well, I am painting the roses that have just begun to bloom, replied Samuel. I am taking advantage of the early morning light. As you know, my eyes are not what they used to be, sighed Samuel. Sadly, I can only paint for about an hour each day. You will have to speak up, Samuel. I'm a little hard of hearing, laughed Jack. So the characters are Jack and Samuel. They're experiencing the loss of one of their senses. Jack is experiencing loss of hearing. Samuel is experiencing loss of sight. So how about we sit for a while under the oak tree, replied Samuel. I have just made some lemonade. I am hot standing in the sunlight, and my eyes are tired. Samuel and Jack walked slowly toward the shade of the giant oak and settled themselves into 2 comfortable garden chairs. Samuel picked up a pitcher of ice-cold lemonade and poured it into 2 sparkling glasses. Both men were silent for a while, until at last Samuel spoke. "I have been pondering life," said Samuel, speaking loudly so that Jack could hear it. "I have such wonderful memories, and you are in many of them." "I'm glad to hear that," said Jack. "Now that your eyes and my ears are failing, we should strike a deal. I will be your eyes if you will be my ears," Jack exclaimed rather loudly. Do you think Jack is being literal or figurative when he says that he will be Samuel's eyes if Samuel will be his ears? That's figurative language. But what does that mean when he says that? Yes, it means they're going to look out for each other. Use what is still working. Whoever can see well is going to help the other person. And whoever can hear well is going to help the other person. The 2 men laughed. At that precise moment, Samuel's dog, Alfie, came to join them. Alfie stretched and yawned and then curled up in the shade between the 2 friends. "Tell me," said Jack, "what is the painter's most valued tool?" "Light," shouted Samuel. "Let me tell you why light is so extraordinary." Samuel lifted himself out of his garden chair and stood beneath the giant oak. As he stood, he gazed out into his beautiful garden that was bursting with color and scent and began to speak. "Our main source of light and heat is the sun, a hot star of glowing gas." Samuel smiled and went on. "Light illuminates objects and makes them visible. Light spreads out in all directions. Because of light, our eyes and our brains are able to form pictures of the world we live in. I have spent my life painting those pictures. Light gives us every sunrise and every sunset. Without light, there is only darkness." Jack stared up into the sky. "I've always wondered how exactly light reaches us here on Earth. The sun is more than 92 million miles away." Samuel nodded. "It is difficult to comprehend how it takes a mere 8 minutes for light from the sun to reach us here on Earth." That really is extraordinary, that light can travel 92 million miles in 8 minutes. That would be like circling the Earth almost 4,000 times in 8 minutes. That's a lot. "Light travels in the form of tiny waves called light waves," explained Samuel. "These light waves travel in straight paths called rays. Rays of light waves travel at the fastest speed possible in a vacuum, a place that has no tiny particles or bits of matter. Because most of outer space has very few particles, it is a vacuum, and light travels there at the remarkable speed of approximately 186,000 miles a second." Jack sat shaking his head and then took a sip of the refreshingly cool lemonade. "That is a lot to think about," he admitted. "It sure is," agreed Samuel, smiling. "Scientists are still studying and learning many new things about light, including that in special situations, light can act like a stream instead of a wave." Jack shook his head. "Figuring out how light works must be complicated, but it is indeed fascinating. And maybe, boys and girls, you'll grow up to be one of those scientists that works with light waves. When you do, be sure to look me up and tell me what your research is all about. I'm interested to know." Samuel nodded. "Light from the sun reaches Earth because it can pass so quickly through outer space. There's almost nothing to block its path. Once light reaches Earth's atmosphere, it slows down a little bit. The atmosphere is like a blanket of air full of gases and moisture that covers the Earth. This blanket of air slows the light down. Then," Samuel continued, "the speed of light slows down even more because objects start getting in the way of the light rays." Samuel pointed to the lemonade. "For example, Rays of light waves move more slowly when they travel through liquids such as this lemonade. Then Samuel pointed to the oak tree, and light waves cannot pass through other objects such as this beautiful oak tree. Because rays of light travel in a straight line, they cannot bend around the tree either. Instead, they leave a shadow or shade, a dark spot on the other side of it. Well, I, like Alfie, am enjoying sitting in the cool shade, where there is clearly less light and heat, pronounced Jack as he sipped his lemonade. At that precise moment, as if he heard his name, Alfie leapt out from under Samuel's chair and jumped high into the air in pursuit of a buzzing bumblebee. Both men stopped talking to watch the dog's frantic attempt to capture the bee, but to no avail. The bee seemed to float away on the warm summer breeze, no doubt in search of the sweetly scented flower to pollinate. Another important thing to remember is light is fuel for our planet, announced Samuel. Light is energy. Energy from the sun supports all forms of life on this planet. Without light and heat from the sun, the farmer would not have food to harvest. In fact, we could not exist on Earth. Super important few sentences. I'm going to read them again. Light is energy. Energy from the sun supports all forms of life on this planet. Without light and heat from the sun, the farmer would not have food to harvest. In fact, we could not exist on Earth. Speaking of food, exclaimed Jack. Yes, indeed, said Samuel. I think I have exhausted both of us, and it is almost time for lunch. What do you say we go into the kitchen and get something to eat? I say that's the best thing I've heard all day, laughed Jack, and I smell something delicious coming from the house. The two men made their way into the coolness of the kitchen and prepared themselves a lunch of homemade zucchini bread and fresh fruits and vegetables gathered from Samuel's garden. They sat at a table next to the kitchen window and talked about old times as they ate their meal. They recalled how they had first become friends in elementary school. They had been in the same third grade class together, and they had both been keen baseball players. They had gone to high school together and then on to the same college where Samuel had studied art and Jack had studied music. They had even been soldiers together. Jack and Samuel are loyal friends. Eventually, Jack and Samuel had both married and had children. Their wives became good friends, and their children grew up playing with each other. Sadly, both of their wives had died. Their children were now adults with children of their own. That gives some good background information on those characters. Before they knew it, several hours had passed, and the bright sun had set. Samuel and Jack were now sitting on the porch in the shimmering twilight. Sounds of various night creatures were beginning to echo in the still of the evening. Why does it look like the sun is setting? Do you remember? It looks like the sun is setting because the earth is rotating. Before they knew it, it won't be long before the stars are twinkling in the night sky and the moon is shining brightly, said Jack. It is almost time for me to go. Samuel gazed silently at the emerging night sky. They sat together, enjoying the cooler evening air. Eventually, Samuel spoke. Isn't it amazing that stars make their own light, but the moon does not? Sunlight bounces off the moon to make it look like it's shining brightly in the night sky, mused Samuel. Of course, I could sit here all night and talk about why light is so important, not only for myself as a painter, but for our very existence, he said contemplatively. That's a fact, replied Jack, smiling at his friend. Samuel smiled too. Jack, how about we go fishing tomorrow morning? Asked Samuel. Sounds good to me, said Jack as he stood up to go. As you know, I am the better fisherman. It will be a miracle, Samuel Van Lumen, if you catch a single fish. We'll see about that, exclaimed Samuel as he watched his best friend walk slowly down the garden path and through the creaky garden gate. So let's ask and listen to some questions and think about what we just read. Lumen means light in Latin. So what word that you heard in what is light contains the root word lumen? Illuminates. So what does the word illuminate have to do with light? Well, if a flashlight or another light source illuminates an object, its light shines on it. And what characters have we heard about in the narrative? Well, we have Samuel Van Lumen, which is light, and Jack Audire, and Alfie the dog. Which character is the musician? Jack. And which character is the painter? Samuel. Why do you think the author chose Van Lumen as Samuel's name? Well, his last name contains lumen, which means light, and Samuel is very interested in and knowledgeable about light because he's a painter. He notices light when he paints and tries to show the qualities of light in his paintings. How do the characters in this narrative use their 5 senses and sensory organs to experience the world around them? Well, they see the roses, the garden, the sun, Alfie, and lots of other things in the garden with their eyes. They taste the lemonade and their lunch with their taste buds. They smell the bread with their noses. They feel the sun and cool shade with their skin, and they hear each other talking. They hear Alfie barking and bees buzzing with their ears. So if somebody asks you, and they will ask you, what is light? You will say, light is a form of energy that most often travels in waves and illuminates or brightens objects and makes them visible. Light is a form of energy that travels in waves, most often, illuminates objects and makes them visible. So what is Earth's main source of light? Yes. And what are some other sources of light that you know about? Natural and man-made. Stars, the moon, electricity, fires, bioluminescence, chemicals, lasers, volcanoes, etc. You heard that light travels in rays. What does that mean? It means that light waves travel in straight paths. A ray is a straight path. You've also heard that rays of light travel fastest in a vacuum. What's a vacuum? A vacuum is a place where there are no particles, such as areas in space between large objects. Through what substance do light waves travel? But more slowly than through air. So light waves can get through some objects. Light waves are blocked by some objects, and light waves travel really quickly when there's no objects. So through what substance do light waves travel, but more slowly than through air? Liquids. Light waves really can travel through liquids, but they slow down. Can rays of light waves bend around objects, or do they travel in a straight path? They travel in a straight path. Because rays of light waves cannot bend around an object, what is formed on the other side of the object that's the light is blocking? We get a shadow or shade is formed where the light cannot reach. What does Samuel mean when he says, light is fuel for our planet? Well, it means that light from the sun helps us see, gives us warmth, gives all living things energy, allows crops to grow. Remember, we've got photosynthesis. You learned about that last year. What is energy? Energy is a force or physical power that living things need to exist and be active. How are your senses of sight and hearing important to you? How might a person's life be different if they didn't have one of these senses? Think about that.